During a lavish wedding in Los Angeles, a woman with a worn-out appearance burst into the hall, pointing an accusatory finger at the groom and shouting words that left everyone frozen in place. "He's my husband." Amid the shock and silence, a dark truth threatened to surface, and nothing would ever be the same again. Los Angeles had never been hotter than on that summer afternoon, and the same could be said for the atmosphere in the luxurious ballroom of the Beverly Hills Grand Hotel. The wedding of Dylan Walker and Olivia Bennett was the epitome of grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting light in a cascade of brilliant prisms, while a string quartet played softly. The guests, magnates, celebrities, and politicians were dressed to impress, animatedly discussing how this was destined to be the event of the year. Yet behind all the opulence and smiling facades, a secret was on the verge of emerging, threatening to turn this fairy tale into a tragedy. Dylan, standing at the altar, exuded confidence. Tall, impeccably groomed, in a custom-made suit, he was the portrait of a man who ruled the world around him. His eyes, however, betrayed a subtle unease that only the most perceptive could notice. Beside him, Olivia, stunning in a French lace gown, seemed the picture-perfect bride. Her smile was genuine, her delicate hands clutching the bouquet tightly, as if holding on to a dream she had waited her entire life to fulfill. The vows were about to begin when a sound pierced through the quiet murmurs of the crowd. A voice, hoarse, strong, and laden with pain. "He's my husband." The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned to the woman who had appeared at the entrance. The contrast with the impeccably dressed guests could not have been starker. Sarah Miller stood there in worn clothes, her hair disheveled, her expression that of someone bearing the weight of the world on her shoulders. Dylan froze. His previously tanned and flawless complexion turned pale. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Sarah began walking toward the altar, each of her steps echoing like thunder in the vast room. "This must be a misunderstanding," Dylan started, trying to regain control. But Sarah, her eyes locked on his, raised a hand full of worn papers. "It's not a mistake, Dylan. It's the truth you tried to bury. I am Sarah Miller, your wife, and these people need to know what you've done." Shock rippled through the audience. Olivia looked at Dylan, searching for an explanation, but his silence was more deafening than any words. Sarah then turned to the guests, her voice trembling with emotion. "You think you know this man? He's a liar, a manipulator. While he built this empire, I was the woman left behind. I was betrayed, deceived, and abandoned with nothing." A murmur spread among the guests. Sarah began handing out photos, pictures of a simple wedding, of a young and smiling Dylan and Sarah, a marriage certificate, handwritten letters filled with promises of eternal love. Olivia dropped her bouquet. Her hands trembled as she looked at Dylan, demanding an explanation. "This can't be true. Dylan, say something." But Dylan, the man who always knew what to say in any situation, remained silent. Security started to move in, but one of the guests, Eleanor Thompson, one of the most influential women present, stood up. "Let her speak," she ordered firmly. Sarah, grateful, took a deep breath and continued. "Dylan left me with nothing. He manipulated documents, hid assets, even took my home, and when everything was done, he abandoned me. No money, no family, no one. Do you know what it's like to live on the streets? I do, and while I suffered, he married another woman to climb even higher." The room was filled with soft gasps and whispers. Olivia took a step back, tears filling her eyes. "Is this who you are, Dylan?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "A liar?" He reached for her hand, but Olivia pulled away with a firm gesture. "Don't touch me." Sarah, feeling the weight of the moment, lowered the papers and looked at Olivia. "I didn't come here to ruin your day, Olivia. I came to reclaim my dignity and show the world who Dylan truly is." As Dylan desperately tried to contain the fallout, secrets began to unravel, and the ballroom, once a symbol of celebration, turned into a courtroom. Sarah didn't just expose her story. She revealed Dylan's true nature, shattering the mask he had worn for so many years. By late afternoon, as the guests began to leave, each carrying a piece of the tragedy they had witnessed, Sarah stood alone, but resolute. She had confronted the man who had destroyed her life, and for the first time in years, she felt a spark of strength and justice. Surrounded by the media and lawyers who now circled him like vultures, Dylan glanced at Sarah with something resembling regret. But Sarah knew it was too late. The first step in her journey to recovery had been taken, and she would never be the same again. The flashes of cameras lit up the exterior of the Beverly Hills Grand Hotel as Sarah Miller walked out through the main doors. The oppressive heat felt lighter compared to the emotional burden she carried. Still wearing the same simple worn clothes she had worn to crash the wedding, she walked quickly, ignoring the shouts of reporters eager for more on the story that had shaken Los Angeles' elite. A few meters away, Olivia sat in a parked limousine, tears streaming down her cheeks, smudging her flawless makeup. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, spoke softly, trying to console her. "My dear, we need to think carefully before acting. Don't do anything rash." Olivia didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the sight of Dylan still at the hotel, surrounded by lawyers, desperately trying to manage the situation. The man she had envisioned spending the rest of her life with had become a stranger in mere hours. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Dylan was caught between denial and rage. He refused to fully acknowledge what had happened. "Sarah is trying to destroy my life," he muttered to his attorney, Michael. "She's a troubled woman. What happened years ago was complicated, but I didn't do anything illegal." Michael, a middle-aged man with an impeccable reputation, adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents Sarah had presented. "Complicated or not, Dylan, this evidence is a problem. Photos, marriage certificate, correspondence. Do you understand what this means?" "None of this matters," Dylan exclaimed, frustrated. "She can't prove the annulment was invalid." "Perhaps not," Michael replied calmly, "but your reputation is already in shambles. Sarah Miller is now the hottest story in Los Angeles, and if this spreads, the real estate empire you dominate could crumble. Who would want to associate with a man accused of betraying and ruining his wife?" Dylan's expression hardened. He knew his reputation was his most valuable asset. Without it, his empire could collapse. Outside the hotel, Sarah sat on a bench near the bus stop, exhausted. Her fingers still gripped the pile of documents that were her only defense against Dylan. She hadn't had a clear plan when she stormed into the wedding. All she knew was that she had to expose the truth, even if it left her more vulnerable than ever. It was then that a woman approached her. Elegantly dressed in understated attire, Eleanor Thompson, a philanthropist and renowned businesswoman, observed Sarah with empathy. "You were very brave today," she said softly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Brave? I'm not sure that's the right word. I just couldn't keep living with this inside me." Eleanor sat down beside her, unbothered by the discomfort of the concrete bench. "Many in your position wouldn't have had the strength to confront a man as powerful as Dylan Walker, especially on such a public stage. What you did took courage, no doubt about it." There was a long silence before Eleanor spoke again. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Sarah hesitated. The answer was obvious, but admitting her reality was difficult. "No." "Then you'll stay with me," Eleanor said firmly. I can't accept that." "I'm not asking for your permission, Sarah. I'm offering an opportunity. I have a guest room, and perhaps this can be the start of something new for you." Sarah finally nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, though this time for a different reason. Meanwhile, at the Bennett mansion, Olivia was wrestling with her own demons. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of a bedside lamp. She stared at the engagement ring still in her hand, spinning it between her fingers. Her mother entered the room, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You need to think about what's best for yourself and for our family," Margaret began. "Dylan is a powerful man. Yes, he's made mistakes, but we shouldn't dismiss the entire future he represents." "Future?" Olivia interrupted, her voice sharp. "Mother, do you think I can spend my life with a man who lied to me from the beginning, who ruined another woman without remorse?" Margaret sighed. "Everyone has secrets, Olivia. Everyone makes mistakes. You have to decide if you can forgive him or not." But Olivia wasn't sure forgiveness was even possible. That same night, Dylan tried to call Olivia, but she didn't answer. He sent messages, pleading to talk, promising to explain everything, but received no response. Frustrated, he felt for the first time a shadow of what Sarah must have experienced, being ignored, cast aside. While Dylan faced the first cracks in his perfect life, Sarah, for the first time in years, slept in a comfortable bed in Eleanor's home. But the relief was fleeting. She knew that confronting Dylan and his web of lies was only the beginning. The next day, newspapers were filled with headlines about the ruined wedding and Sarah's revelations. Some called her a heroine, others an opportunist, but one thing was certain: The truth about Dylan Walker could no longer be ignored. And so, as the city awakened to a new day, 3 lives were irrevocably intertwined in a battle of power, regret, and redemption. 7 years before that fateful afternoon at the Beverly Hills Grand Hotel, Sarah Miller had lived in a small house in Pasadena with Dylan Walker. It was a modest home, but full of hope and promises. Sarah, then 26, worked tirelessly at 2 jobs, a diner waitress by day and a bartender by night. She did it to support both of them, while Dylan chased his ambitious dreams in real estate. To Sarah, the sacrifice was worth it. Dylan had an irresistible charm and spoke of the future as if it were only a matter of time before their fortune arrived. "We're going to be great, Sarah, millionaires, and it'll all be because we believed in each other," he'd say, holding her hands with intensity. But it wasn't all promises and sweet words. There were signs, small at first but increasingly undeniable. Dylan started spending more time away from home, justifying it with important meetings and strategic connections. The charming smile that once seemed reserved just for her now appeared freely at parties and business gatherings, directed at others. It was on one of those nights that Sarah first felt the cracks forming in her world. She was at the bar where she worked, cleaning tables after closing, when she overheard 2 customers at a nearby table. "Dylan Walker is a genius," one of them said. "I heard he landed a millionaire investor for that downtown project." "Yeah, and they say he knows exactly how to manipulate people to get what he wants," the other replied with a cutting smile. Sarah froze, the rag still in her hand. Dylan hadn't mentioned any millionaire investor to her. In fact, he hadn't been mentioning much of anything lately. That night when Dylan came home, Sarah confronted him, but he dismissed her concerns. "You're listening to gossip, Sarah. People make stuff up. What matters is that I'm working hard for both of us. Trust me, okay?" Sarah wanted to believe him. After all, Dylan was her husband, the man she had left everything behind for. But doubt began to creep in. A few months later, Sarah's life took a drastic turn. Dylan announced that he was on the verge of closing a deal that would change their lives forever. "I need complete freedom to act," he said. "That means I might have to make quick decisions, but I want you to know that everything I'm doing is for us." Sarah smiled, though something about his words felt off. She had never questioned his intentions before, but now it seemed like Dylan was taking too many liberties. The true betrayal came to light on an otherwise ordinary morning. Sarah was at home, enjoying a rare day off when she received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Walker, this is Hampton and Willis Brokerage, just calling to confirm the sale of the Oak Valley property. Mr. Walker requested the transfer to his account, but we need your signature as co-owner." Sarah froze. "I'm sorry, what property?" "The house you currently reside in." The blood drained from her face. Trying to keep calm, she asked for more details. She learned that months earlier, Dylan had quietly transferred the deed to his name alone. Now he was selling the house without consulting her. When Dylan came home that evening, Sarah was waiting for him, her anger and disbelief overflowing. "How could you do this, Dylan? You sold our house. You lied to me." He tried to deflect. "Calm down, Sarah. I'm doing this for us. This money will catapult us to the next level." "The next level?" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "And where does that leave me, Dylan? Without a house, without anything." "You don't understand," he replied coldly. "Sometimes to win, you have to make sacrifices." It was then that Sarah realized how much Dylan had changed. He was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. Now he was a stranger willing to do anything to achieve his goals. But the final blow came days later. While Sarah desperately tried to resolve the issue with the house, she received a notification from the bank. All their joint accounts had been emptied. Without warning, Dylan had withdrawn every last cent. When Sarah confronted him again, this time he was blunt. "You'd better accept it, Sarah. We don't have anything together anymore." Confused and in disbelief, she asked what he meant. Dylan finally revealed that he had annulled their marriage months earlier without her knowledge. He had forged her signature and manipulated legal documents to sever their ties while she still believed they were partners. "You can't do this," she whispered, her heart breaking. "I already did, and there's nothing you can do about it." That night, Sarah was evicted from the home she had helped sustain. With no money, no possessions, and nowhere to go, she found herself alone on the streets of Los Angeles. In the months that followed, Sarah fought to survive. She slept in shelters or beneath overpasses, and relied on the kindness of strangers for food. Each day was a battle, But the emotional pain was even more devastating. She wondered how the man who had promised to love her could betray her so cruelly. Years passed, but Sarah never forgot. Each cold night and each missed meal only strengthened her determination. She knew that one day she would have the chance to confront Dylan again, and when the opportunity came, she would not falter. The streets became Sarah Miller's home, but it was a cold, impersonal, and unforgiving home. The nights were the worst. Without a safe place to sleep, she alternated between overcrowded shelters, where every bed came at a price, and deserted sidewalks, where the icy wind made every minute feel like an eternity. At first, Sarah clung to remnants of her dignity. She tried to keep her appearance presentable, and convinced herself that her situation was temporary, that Dylan would somehow come back and right the wrong he had done. But reality was merciless. Months went by, and not only did Dylan ignore her, but he also made a point of keeping his distance. Gradually, Sarah began to unravel. What little she owned, clothes, keepsakes, small objects she carried in her pockets, disappeared, lost or sold, to secure her next meal. But what hurt the most was the loss of her identity. She was no longer Sarah Walker, the wife of a promising man. Now she was just another invisible person among the city's countless faces. One night, after being turned away from a shelter for failing to pay the minimal fee, Sarah sat on the steps of a closed store, hugging her knees to shield herself from the cold. Tears came without warning, hot and heavy, streaming down her face as she stared at the cracked pavement. "Why me?" she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse and broken. Memories of the past haunted her. She thought of the day she met Dylan, his charming smile, and how she believed he would be her salvation. He was the man who had promised to lift her out of poverty, build a future together, and love her unconditionally. But now, he was the reason for her downfall. That same night, Sarah decided to visit the place where her house once stood. The neighborhood, once her refuge, felt like a distant world. She stood across the street, watching the lights inside and imagining the people who lived there now. A happy family, perhaps. They had no idea that the woman crouched on the sidewalk across the street had once called that place home. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The voice of a security guard snapped her out of her thoughts. Sarah shook her head and quickly stood, embarrassed. "Yes, I'm leaving now." That night, she understood that the past was completely out of her reach. With no direction, Sarah sank deeper into despair. The days became indistinguishable. She spent her mornings searching for shelter or food, and her nights trying to find a safe corner to sleep. Her few belongings now fit into a plastic bag, and the reflection in a dirty shop window showed a face she barely recognized. There were moments when Sarah questioned whether it was worth continuing. One such moment came on an especially difficult afternoon. She was sitting in a park, holding a bowl of soup distributed by volunteers. A small boy, about 5 years old, approached her, tugging at his mother's hand. "Mommy, why is that lady crying?" he asked. Sarah realized tears were streaming down her face unnoticed. The boy's mother pulled him away without a word, but his gaze stayed with her. He didn't look at her with pity or disdain, but with genuine curiosity and an innocent kindness Sarah hadn't seen in a long time. That night, while sheltering under a bridge, Sarah looked up at the starry sky. Despite the darkness in her life, there was something in that moment that sparked a glimmer of resilience. She whispered to herself, "This can't be the end." Over time, Sarah began setting small goals. First, she sought help at a public library, using the computers to research support centers and organizations that might help her. There, she found a program offering meals, clothing, and psychological counseling for homeless women. That was how she met Ruth, a seasoned and warm social worker who didn't look at her with judgment, but with understanding. During their counseling sessions, Sarah began to express her pain and anger. "He destroyed my life," Sarah admitted during one conversation. "I don't know how I'll ever get over this." Ruth leaned forward, her expression serious. "You're right, Sarah. What he did was horrible, and you have every right to be hurt. But here's what I know. As long as you're holding on to that anger, he still controls you. It's not about forgetting what happened, it's about deciding that you deserve more." Ruth's words stayed with Sarah. For the first time, she began to consider that her future didn't have to be defined by what Dylan had taken from her. With the center's support, Sarah got some new clothes and a spot in a temporary work program. She started helping organize meals for other homeless people. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a sense of purpose, and, for the first time in years, a sense of dignity. One day, while cleaning tables at the center, Sarah found an old newspaper. On the front page was a picture of Dylan, smiling, next to Olivia Bennett. The headline praised the union of the real estate magnate and the heiress of an influential family. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, but also something deeper, a growing determination. He was still living without consequences, while she struggled to rebuild her life. That had to change. That night, Sarah opened her bag of belongings and pulled out a small stack of documents she had carefully kept for years. Among them were the marriage certificate, love letters Dylan had written, and bank records she had recovered with Ruth's help. It was all she had to prove the truth. "I don't know how, but I'll make him pay," she whispered to herself. Sarah woke up early the next morning. The light streaming through the cracks in the window of her small room in Eleanor Thompson's house seemed to herald something new. She ran her fingers over the papers she had so carefully preserved, the marriage certificate, the letters Dylan had written, and the forged annulment document. These were not just proof, but fragments of a past she couldn't forget, no matter how much she wanted to. That morning, while helping Eleanor arrange flowers in her shop, Sarah felt restless. Since starting work there, she had felt safer, more human. But she knew the peace she had found wouldn't be complete while Dylan remained unpunished. Her life would never move forward as long as he went untouched, living as if nothing had happened. Eleanor noticed Sarah's silence. Over time, the two had built a relationship that went beyond employer and employee. There was trust, a bond of genuine friendship. "You're quieter than usual," Eleanor said, while arranging a bouquet of roses. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated. For months she had carried her story like a heavy secret, too burdensome to share. But something about Eleanor made her feel safe. "I need to tell you something," she finally said, "about who I really am." During their coffee break, Sarah shared everything. She spoke about Dylan, their marriage, his betrayal, and the years she spent living on the streets. Eleanor listened intently, never interrupting, and when Sarah finished, there were tears in the businesswoman's eyes. "How you've been through things no one should ever endure," Eleanor said, holding Sarah's hand, "but it's not too late to do something about it." "I don't even know where to start," Sarah admitted. "He's so powerful. Who would believe me?" Eleanor smiled gently. "You have evidence, don't you? That's already a start. And you have the truth on your side. Dylan built his castle on lies, Sarah. Castles like that always crumble." Eleanor's words lit a fire in Sarah. For weeks she had been working to rebuild herself. Now it was time to take the next step. Sarah began carefully crafting her plan. First, she gathered all the evidence she had and arranged it chronologically, creating a clear timeline of events. With Eleanor's help, she got in touch with a volunteer attorney who specialized in cases involving vulnerable individuals. The attorney, a man named Peter Laughlin, was straightforward and honest. After reviewing Sarah's documents, he shook his head, a mix of admiration and concern. What he did wasn't just morally wrong, it was possibly illegal. If the signatures on these documents were forged, we have a case. But you need to understand that going up against someone like Dylan Walker won't be easy. He has money, influence, and a network of powerful people on his side. Sarah took a deep breath. "It doesn't matter how hard it is. I have to do this." Peter nodded. "In that case, we'll need more than documents. We need witnesses, people who can back up your story." Sarah knew this would be a challenge. Dylan had always been careful to hide his intentions, but she remembered an old friend who might help, a former colleague of Dylan's named Marcia, who knew more than she should about his business dealings. After days of searching, Sarah finally found Marcia. She was still working in real estate, but now at a smaller company. When Sarah appeared at her office, Marcia looked visibly uneasy. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I need your help," Sarah said bluntly. "I know you know Dylan, and I know you're aware of what he did." Marcia hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "Sarah, I'm sorry for what happened to you, but going after Dylan Walker isn't a good idea. He has eyes and ears everywhere." "Marcia, he ruined my life. I can't keep living like this. I'm not asking you to risk yourself for me. I just need you to tell the truth, please." After a long silence, Marcia finally relented. "All right, but only because you deserve justice." With Marcia's testimony and the documents she had safeguarded for so long, Sarah felt her plan finally taking shape. But there was one last element, making it all public. Peter advised caution. But Sarah knew Dylan was a master at manipulating people and controlling the narrative. She needed a stage large enough that the truth couldn't be ignored. And so, weeks later, Sarah crashed Dylan and Olivia's wedding, armed with the evidence she had gathered, and a courage she didn't know she possessed. As she watched Los Angeles' elite hear her story, and witnessed Dylan's unraveling, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: control over her own life. After the explosion of the scandal at Dylan and Olivia's wedding, Los Angeles couldn't stop talking about it. The story dominated headlines and gossip, and Dylan Walker's impeccable reputation began to crumble like a house of cards. He had spent years building his image as a successful businessman, but now the city's elite saw him as a cruel, unscrupulous opportunist. Dylan locked himself in his office, poring over documents and speaking incessantly with his lawyers. Each call seemed worse than the last. His partners started withdrawing investments, stating they didn't want to be associated with a man whose ethics were being publicly questioned. Dylan knew that if he didn't act quickly, he could lose everything he had built. Meanwhile, Sarah, now sheltered in Eleanor Thompson's home, was trying to cope with the emotional fallout of her actions. Though she had exposed Dylan, the fight was far from over. He was still powerful, and she knew he wouldn't sit idly by as his empire crumbled. One morning, while having coffee, Sarah received a call from Peter, the attorney helping her. "Sarah, we need to talk. It's urgent." In Peter's office, he explained the situation. "Dylan has filed a lawsuit against you for defamation. He's claiming the accusations you made at his wedding are false, and that you unfairly exposed him, causing irreparable damage to his reputation." Sarah felt her stomach churn. "But he knows it's true." "I have proof, Peter." "I know, and he does too. But Dylan is playing a different game now. He's trying to intimidate you. He wants you to back down before this goes any further." Peter paused, looking her in the eye. "The question is, are you ready to keep fighting?" Sarah took a deep breath. The idea of facing Dylan again was terrifying, but backing down wasn't an option. She knew that if she gave up now, he would get away with it once more. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." While Sarah worked on her defense with Peter, Dylan was taking desperate measures to salvage what remained of his reputation. He hired a public relations team to reshape his image and began giving selective interviews, presenting himself as the victim of a smear campaign. In one of these live interviews, Dylan appeared calm and confident, dressed in an impeccable suit and speaking in a grave tone that aimed to convey sincerity. "I deeply regret what happened at my wedding," he told the journalist, with an expression that seemed rehearsed. "But the allegations made against me are baseless. I am taking all necessary legal measures to protect my reputation and my family's." Sarah watched the interview from home, with Eleanor by her side. Every word Dylan said made her blood boil. "He's lying to the entire world," she said, clenching her fists. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And the world will find out the truth, Sarah. Don't let this shake you." But Dylan didn't stop at interviews. He began using his influence to destabilize Sarah in other ways. He reached out to her former colleagues and spread rumors, painting her as a desperate opportunist. Sarah started noticing strange looks at the flower shop, and some customers began whispering behind her back. One night, as she left work, she found an envelope tucked under Eleanor's car windshield wiper. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "Give up while you can." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She knew this was Dylan's doing, or someone working for him. He was trying to intimidate her, but she also knew that backing down would mean letting him win. At the same time, Olivia Bennett, who had publicly ended her engagement to Dylan, was also dealing with the fallout of the scandal. Despite being a victim of the situation, the exposure had dragged her family into the spotlight in an unwanted way. Tabloids speculated about what Olivia knew and when she knew it, and her name became synonymous with public humiliation. In an unexpected gesture, Olivia reached out to Sarah. The two met at a discreet cafe in Los Angeles, far from cameras and prying eyes. "Why did you want to see me?" Sarah asked, wary. Olivia looked tired, but her voice was firm. "Because I want to help." Sarah raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Help? Why?" "Because he deceived me too," Olivia replied. "Maybe in a different way, but Dylan lied to me just like he lied to you. He used me to climb higher, and now that he's fallen, I've realized I never really knew him." Sarah studied Olivia for a moment, though there was something vulnerable about her. It was clear that Olivia was a strong woman determined to clear her own name. "And what are you willing to do?" Sarah asked. "Whatever it takes to make him pay for what he's done," Olivia said without hesitation. From that moment, Sarah and Olivia formed an unlikely alliance. Working together, they began digging deeper into Dylan's business dealings and contacts, searching for anything that could further incriminate him. But Dylan wasn't willing to lose. He redoubled his efforts to discredit Sarah, hiring investigators to uncover any detail from her past that could be used against her in court. As tensions rose, Sarah felt the weight of the battle pressing down on her. She knew she was up against a powerful and ruthless adversary, but with Olivia by her side and Peter's unwavering support, she felt for the first time in years that she wasn't alone. Still, the burden of the fight seemed heavier every day. The hardest blow came on a sunny afternoon when Sarah received an urgent phone call from Peter. "Sarah, we need to meet in person. It's serious." In the lawyer's office, Peter looked grim. He slid an envelope across the table. "This arrived this morning." Sarah opened the envelope and found a series of falsified documents. They were fabricated medical reports, allegedly proving that she had been admitted to a psychiatric clinic years ago. Another document suggested she had struggled with substance abuse. "He's trying to discredit you," Peter said. "If this reaches the court, he'll use these papers to portray you as unstable and unreliable." Sarah felt her anger flare. "This is a lie. He knows it's a lie." "I know, Sarah, but we need to move quickly to refute these allegations before they gain traction." The tension was palpable. Dylan was playing dirty, willing to destroy Sarah's credibility at any cost, but she knew that giving up would mean handing him the victory he so desperately wanted. Sarah wasn't the only one bearing the weight of Dylan's actions. Olivia was also beginning to feel the consequences of her association with him. The relentless press, hungry for scandal, started speculating about Olivia's role in the story. Some headlines insinuated that she had known about Sarah all along and chosen to ignore it. Others painted her as a naive heiress, manipulated by a shrewder man. One evening, while Sarah and Olivia were going over documents together, Olivia opened up. "Do you know what bothers me the most about all of this?" she said, staring at the scattered papers on the table. "It's the fact that even now, with all the truth coming to light, Dylan is still trying to control the narrative. He's always been like that, always thought he could shape the world around him to fit what he wanted." Sarah watched her in silence, realizing that Olivia, despite her privileged background, was also a victim of Dylan's manipulations. "He can try," Sarah replied firmly, "but this time he won't succeed." Their plan gained momentum when Olivia managed to access a confidential file from Dylan's company. Among the documents, they found proof that he had conducted illegal transactions to hide money from his investors, and more importantly, evidence that he had forged documents, including the ones used to annul his marriage to Sarah. Armed with this information, Sarah and Peter organized a press conference. It was a risky move, but necessary. They needed to expose Dylan before he could use his tactics to destroy Sarah. On the day of the press conference, the small hall was packed with journalists. Sarah's heart raced as she stepped onto the makeshift stage. Olivia sat in the front row, offering silent support. Sarah began to speak, her voice shaky at first but gaining strength as the words flowed. "I spent years living in the shadow of a man who swore to love me, but chose to destroy me to achieve his own goals. Today I'm here to tell the truth." She presented the evidence they had gathered, the marriage certificate, Dylan's letters, the bank records, and finally, the confidential documents Olivia had obtained. The room fell silent as the journalists absorbed every detail. When she finished, Sarah felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders, but she knew the real test was yet to come. Across the city, Dylan watched the press conference from his mansion. His expression was dark, and his clenched jaw betrayed his mounting anger. He turned off the television before the broadcast ended, slamming the remote onto the table with force. "Damn Sarah Miller," he muttered under his breath. That same night, Dylan reached out to one of his oldest allies in the real estate business, a man named Jonathan Reese. Reese was notorious for handling dirty work when necessary, and Dylan needed something big to turn the tide in his favor. "I want you to find something on her," Dylan said over the phone. "Anything I can use to end this for good." As Dylan ramped up his efforts to destroy Sarah, she and Olivia were dealt another unexpected blow. One of the most critical pieces of evidence they had presented, a document detailing Dylan's forgery, was declared inadmissible in court due to technicalities. Peter explained that while the information was accurate, the way they had obtained the file made it legally unusable. Sarah felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. "Does this mean he's going to get away with it again?" she asked, desperate. Peter shook his head. "We still have other elements in the case, but this definitely weakens our position." The news was a devastating setback, and Sarah began to doubt whether she could keep going. That night, sitting in the room Eleanor had lent her, she held one of Dylan's old letters, rereading the words he had written years ago. "You are the reason I can dream. I'll never forget all that you do for me." The irony of those words hit her hard, but instead of letting it drag her further into despair, something inside her ignited. She realized Dylan wasn't the man who had written those words. Maybe he never had been. The next morning, Sarah walked into Peter's office with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm not giving up," she said. "He might take a piece off the board, but he can't erase everything we have. If there's another way to fight, I want to know." Peter gave her a small smile. "Then we keep going." The tension was at its peak. Dylan's underhanded tactics and Sarah's resilience were hurtling toward a decisive confrontation that would change everything. The trial was scheduled for a sunny Friday morning in Los Angeles. The ever-bustling city seemed to hold its breath in anticipation as Sarah Miller's case against Dylan Walker dominated the headlines. Everyone wanted to know whether the once untouchable real estate mogul would finally face justice or emerge victorious once more. Sarah woke early that day. As she sipped coffee in Eleanor's kitchen, she reflected on her journey. She had faced betrayal, destitution, and the scorn of a man she had loved, only for him to choose to destroy her. She knew that today would be pivotal, not just for the case, but for her own peace of mind. Eleanor gave her an encouraging smile as she adjusted the brooch on her blouse. "No matter what happens today, Sarah, you've already won. You survived everything he tried to do to you. That alone is a triumph." Sarah took a deep breath and nodded, but deep down, she knew survival wasn't enough. She needed to win. The courtroom was tense. The press was out in full force, their camera flashes turning the space into a spectacle even before the hearing began. Dylan entered the room in an impeccable suit, but the expression on his face betrayed the confident man he once was. He looked tired, worn down by weeks of scandal and the rapid fall of his reputation. When Sarah walked in, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Though dressed simply, there was a dignity in her posture that silenced any doubts about her strength. She looked at Dylan, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was no love or longing left in that gaze, only the certainty that the truth had to prevail. The session began with Dylan's lawyers presenting his defense. They tried to paint him as the victim of a smear campaign, wielding falsified medical reports and other lies to discredit Sarah, but Peter was prepared. He calmly and precisely dismantled each argument, exposing the fraud and inconsistencies in Dylan's claims. "Ms. Miller is not here to destroy Mr. Walker out of revenge," Peter said in his closing statement. "She is here to reclaim what he stole from her, her dignity, her voice, her life." Dylan, in a last-ditch effort to defend himself, was called to the stand. He rose slowly, the weight of the accusations evident in his posture. For the first time, he no longer seemed like the self-assured man everyone once knew. "I did what I did because I needed to get ahead in life," he said, his tone attempting to justify his actions. "It wasn't personal. I had to leave the past behind to achieve my goals." A tense silence filled the room. Sarah, who had remained silent until then, stood up. "Not personal," she said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "You took everything from me, Dylan. Everything. And you still have the audacity to say it wasn't personal." Dylan averted his gaze, unable to hold the intensity of her accusation. Then, Peter presented the most damning piece of evidence to close the case. It was an old email Dylan had sent to one of his business partners at the time of his annulment with Sarah. In the email, he admitted to falsifying the documents and mocked how easily he had manipulated the situation. When the email was read aloud, a ripple of shock swept through the courtroom. Dylan lowered his head, finally realizing he had lost. The judge delivered the final verdict, declaring Dylan guilty of fraud and misappropriation of assets. He was ordered to pay significant damages to Sarah and faced criminal investigations for his actions in the real estate sector. But for Sarah, the greatest victory wasn't the money or the conviction. It was knowing that, for the first time, the world saw the real Dylan Walker. After the trial, Dylan left the courthouse alone. The press, which once idolized him, now swarmed him with scathing questions. But he didn't respond. He was finished. His reputation, his empire, and his future had been destroyed by his own greed and selfishness. Olivia, who had watched everything unfold beside Sarah, sighed with relief. "I think he finally knows what it means to lose," she said. Sarah smiled faintly, but there was a melancholy edge to her expression. "I hope he learns something from it," she replied. In the weeks that followed, Dylan tried to salvage what little remained of his life, but every door he knocked on was shut. No one wanted to be associated with him. He lost his home, his businesses, and eventually the few friends he had left. One day, he appeared at the flower shop where Sarah worked. When she saw him, her first reaction was shock, but she quickly composed herself. Dylan was unrecognizable. His face was gaunt, his hair disheveled, and his once ambitious eyes now looked empty. "What are you doing here, Dylan?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms. He hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. I wanted to apologize." Sarah studied him, trying to decipher his intentions. For a brief moment she felt pity for him, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. "Apologize," she repeated calmly. "And what exactly do you expect me to do with that? I know I can't fix what I've done, but I had to say I'm sorry, I was wrong. To you, to Olivia, to everyone." Sarah shook her head slowly. "You know, Dylan, I waited a long time for this moment, but the forgiveness you're looking for, it's not something I can give you." "Then what do I do now?" he asked, his voice trembling. She gave him a small, sad smile. "That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself." Dylan left the shop, leaving Sarah in peace. She watched him walk down the street, solitary and carrying the weight of his choices. That evening, Sarah returned home and sat in Eleanor's garden. As she looked at the flowers she had helped plant, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. She had overcome her past and, more importantly, reclaimed her dignity. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she knew she could face it with her head held high. In the months following the trial, Los Angeles moved on, as it always did, but the lives of Dylan Walker and Sarah Miller would never be the same. The city, which once idolized Dylan as a paragon of success, now saw him as a symbol of unchecked greed and betrayal. His name, once associated with power, had become a burden he could not escape. Dylan had lost everything: his fortune, his reputation, and the trust of those who once surrounded him. Former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged down by the fall of a man now synonymous with scandal. He was forced to sell his properties and face multiple legal investigations. Eventually, he moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the luxury and influence that once defined his life. The nights were the hardest. Alone, Dylan replayed his choices over and over, trying to pinpoint the exact moment where it all went wrong. But deep down he knew his unchecked ambition and inability to value the people around him, especially Sarah, had been his undoing. One night, while walking the nearly deserted streets of his new neighborhood, he passed by a shop window displaying a flower arrangement. For a fleeting moment, he imagined Sarah working in her florist shop, her calm, resolute smile disarming as always. Regret consumed him, but he knew it was far too late to go back. While Dylan faced his new reality, Sarah was finally rebuilding the life she had lost. With Eleanor's support and the settlement money from the trial, she opened her own flower shop, a small and welcoming space in a bustling Los Angeles neighborhood. She named the shop Roots and Beginnings, a reflection of her journey. Every flower she sold was a reminder that even the most fragile things could grow and thrive, no matter how difficult the circumstances. One day, while arranging a fresh batch of roses on the counter, Olivia Bennett walked into the shop. The two women had kept in touch since the trial, and though Olivia was still dealing with her own challenges, she had found a new strength alongside Sarah. "Lovely place," Olivia said, glancing around with a sincere smile. Sarah chuckled. "It's no luxury hotel, but it works." Olivia selected a bouquet and sat down to chat. "Did you hear? Dylan sold the last property he had. Word is he's living in a tiny apartment somewhere on the outskirts." Sarah paused, processing the information. She no longer felt anger or a desire for revenge, only a strange sadness for a man who had squandered everything of value in his life. "I hope he finds peace," Sarah said at last. "Not for me, but for himself." Olivia nodded. I do too. He needs to learn to live with who he is. The conversation shifted to other topics, and the two women laughed together like friends who had weathered a storm. Not long after, Sarah received an unexpected letter at her shop. As she opened the envelope, she immediately recognized Dylan's handwriting. The note was brief, straightforward, but carried a weight she could feel. Sarah, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say I'm sorry for everything, for destroying the life we had, for using and discarding you. You deserved so much more than I was capable of giving. I hope you found what you deserve. Dylan. Sarah read the letter several times before folding it and placing it in a drawer. She didn't cry, nor did she feel anger. She simply felt that at last a door had closed. That same day on her walk home, she passed a park where children played and families gathered. The sound of laughter filled the air, and for a moment, Sarah stopped to watch. She felt at peace, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. The impact of what she had endured was still there, like scars that would never fully fade. But over time, she had learned to see them not as marks of pain, but as symbols of survival and resilience. Dylan, meanwhile, continued his life in isolation. He tried to find new paths, but his soul was marked by regret. He felt loneliness like a constant shadow, the result of his selfish choices and his disregard for those who once loved him. One night, sitting on a park bench, Dylan gazed out at the Los Angeles skyline, a city he had once dominated. The lights twinkled in the distance, but to him, they seemed out of reach. He knew he would never regain what he had lost. Meanwhile, Sarah was closing her flower shop at the end of a long day. She placed a vase of flowers on the counter, turned off the lights, and locked the door. She glanced at the illuminated sign above the shop, Roots and Beginnings, and a smile spread across her face. She had lost much, but not everything. She still had her strength, her dignity, and most importantly, the freedom to create a life that was truly hers. Spring arrived in Los Angeles, bringing with it a lightness that seemed to reflect Sarah's new chapter. Her shop, Roots and Beginnings, thrived. Loyal customers returned weekly, drawn not only by the beauty of the arrangements, but by the welcoming energy that filled the space. For Sarah, every flower sold was another step forward, a symbol of rebuilding and hope. One morning, as she watered the plants growing in pots outside the shop, Sarah noticed a couple walking hand in hand. They smiled at each other, exchanging looks filled with tenderness. For a moment, she thought of how naive she had been to believe her love with Dylan was unshakable. But instead of sadness, she felt gratitude. The experience had shaped her, teaching her the value of self-love and the importance of never relying on someone else to define her worth. Eleanor Thompson remained a significant figure in her life. The woman who had given her shelter and hope had become a mentor and friend. They met regularly for tea and shared stories. "You've found your path, Sarah," Eleanor said on a sunny afternoon. "There's a strength in you that no one can take away." Sarah smiled, warmed by Ruth's words. "I think everything I've been through taught me that strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you build." Despite the positivity surrounding her, Dylan still crossed her mind from time to time. Not out of love or longing, but out of curiosity. She wondered if he had found peace, or if he continued wandering the city as a shadow of his former self. One day, on her way to the local market, Sarah saw someone sitting on a park bench. It was Dylan. His head was bowed, his hands clasped, lost in thought. For a moment she stopped, watching him from a distance. He seemed smaller than she remembered, as if the weight of his choices had diminished the man he once was. Sarah felt tempted to approach him, but she knew there was nothing left to say. Their story was over. With a sigh, she resumed her walk, leaving Dylan behind, both in the present and in her past. A few days later, while working at her shop, Sarah received an unexpected visit. It was Ruth, the social worker who had helped her through her darkest moments. Ruth was smiling, holding a small bouquet of daisies. "I thought it was time to visit your shop," she said. Sarah was overcome with emotion seeing Ruth, someone who had been so essential in her journey to recovery. "Ruth, you have no idea how good it is to see you. Please come in." The two spent hours talking, reminiscing about the difficult days and celebrating how far Sarah had come. Before leaving, Ruth held Sarah's hands and said, "Never forget that you're an inspiration, not just to me, but to so many other women who've gone through what you have." That night, alone at home, Sarah reflected on Ruth's words. She thought about how her story had begun with pain and betrayal, but was ending with resilience and new beginnings. Meanwhile, Dylan faced days that felt endlessly lonely. He tried to find work, but his ruined reputation thwarted every attempt. The friends who had once surrounded him had disappeared, and the social circle he had so valued now saw him as a cautionary tale of failure. On a cold night, sitting on the small couch in his apartment, Dylan revisited the letter he had written to Sarah. He knew she would probably never forgive him, but writing those words had been his only attempt to confront the pain he carried. Looking at his weary reflection in the mirror, he wondered if he would ever find a way to redeem himself. Months passed, and Sarah's life continued to bloom. One day, while tending to the garden behind her shop, she saw a mother and her young daughter walk in. The little girl's eyes sparkled with joy, and her laughter was infectious. Sarah realized they represented what she had always wanted, a future full of happiness and possibilities. In that moment, something shifted within her. She understood that she had not only overcome her past, but had also opened herself to the future. She didn't know what it held, but she felt ready for anything. At the final chapter of her story, Sarah was at peace. Though she carried the scars of her experiences, those marks had transformed into reminders of her strength and resilience. Dylan, on the other hand, remained alone, living on the outskirts of a city that had once revered him. He had everything he needed to be happy, but squandered every opportunity with his greed and selfishness. Now he was trapped in a cycle of regret, constantly reminded of all he had lost. At her flower shop, Sarah placed a new arrangement in the window, a mix of daisies, sunflowers, and lilies, symbolizing new beginnings, strength, and light. It was just another ordinary day, but for her, every ordinary day was a miracle. As she watched customers enter, she felt whole for the first time in a long while. Sarah Miller's story wasn't one of defeat, but of the strength to rise even when everything seemed lost. And you? What would you do if you discovered you had been used and discarded by the person you trusted most? Could you face your past? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you missed our last story, here's what happened. The financial crisis was crushing Florence and Benjamin until an indecent proposal promised to save everything. Despite Benjamin's objections, Florence accepted, believing it was the path to a better future. But the price of that choice was far too high, bringing devastating consequences that would change their lives forever. Watch the full story now by clicking the video on your screen, and I'll see you there.